All right. First of all, my name is Katrina Coker. Some of you may have know me as the Scrum Mother. The Scrum Mother on social media. I had a blog, but that is actually more than just a cute handle. It is actually the name of my company as well. But before I go any further, I always want to say thank you. Thank you for being here when you could be anywhere else. I appreciate your time, and my personal mission as well as my business mission is to teach, inspire, and move towards purpose, power, and progress. And that starts today. And I strive for this to be one of the most productive times of your day. So with that being said, I want to first set some expectations about what we are not going to be talking about today. I am not going to be going over Agile or Scrum 101. I am also not going to be going over the Scrum Guide or Scrum Master certifications. I am going to be talking to you about my experience as a Scrum Master and of a lot of anecdotes, more so that I can share my personal experiences with you that might also help with your own personal experiences. But my objective is for you to walk away with at least one thing that you can do today to get more comfortable with conflict. And I say that because at the end, I'm also going to ask you how that went, if I achieved that objective or not, which is why I say I want this to be one of the most productive times of your day. And also giving you a heads up that this is also something that I am going to be proposing as a paid workshop. So I very much value your gift. People in our industry say feedback is a gift. It is very much a gift that I value all types of feedback, positive, constructive. And so I appreciate and I want to say thank you in advance for that. So what we will cover is I'll just give you a little bit of brief overview of myself. Some of you may not know me. And also we're going to talk about conflict modes. You'll learn what that is in just a little bit. Talk about some foundational aspects and themes and categories that I felt would be neglectful if I didn't talk about these things. And then it's going to be more of a workshop style. So I can talk to you about ways that we can practice conflict management and the type of conflict that I break it down into. But there's also a series of questions that we can ask ourselves to discuss that, to live them out. Anybody have any questions? If you came for Agile or Scrum 101, I ask you to not leave. I think that this would still be valuable for you, but as we always say, you can leave if it is not valuable for you. But I think that this is something that is more like a life skills that, for example, Suzanne, you said that you're in product. Anybody can use this. This is something that I built this presentation specifically for that this is topics that anybody can use in any role. My hat usually is under the Scrum Master umbrella though. Okay. So a little bit about who I am. Does anybody, and you can post in the chat, raise your hand. Anybody know who I was before you came today? Some people are shaking head no. Okay. So I know that some people have already said you did know me. Well, welcome. And some of you that know me may actually not know some of this stuff. So I am from, where I'm originally from is Buford, Sugar Hill, Georgia. That is, if you ever hear of Lake Lanier or the Mall of Georgia, this is in this top right-hand corner of this map. That is where I am originally from. I have also lived in Dallas, Texas for 5 years, as well as the DC area for 3 years. But I am now back in Georgia, and I now live in Johns Creek, Georgia, which is that bottom circle. I'm about 35, 40 minutes north of Atlanta. But when people say Atlanta's an hour from Atlanta, they are serious because it literally somewhere it's supposed to take me 30 minutes, took me an hour and a half. And then I live with my 2 cats, Fiona and Avery. Fiona is the one on the black one, and Avery is the gray and white one. And you may see them make an appearance today. As far as just fun facts about myself, I am forever a foodie. Food is my favorite food, and I love to explore. So this picture up on the boat might recognize a few people, Saba and Regina, and a few of us went on a sunset cruise in Miami a few years ago after Agile International Conference, and sometimes Regina sets up some of these activities, so that was super fun. The other one on the right is I went on the Napa Valley wine train. If you love wine and you love to explore, highly recommend it. And for those of you who are specifically with the Atlassian community, I just use Scrum to train for my first half marathon. I have a personal instance of Jira where I run my whole life through Jira. And I have a personal, but I have separate projects. I have a project for personal as well as for my business. And so I used my training for Scrum. I ran it through Jira and it ended up being a wonderful day. So would love to talk to you about that. Also use Trello regularly as well. But as far as what you were here today and what gives me the credit to be speaking on this topic, I actually have a background as a business analyst and then also a product owner. So I have been a product owner as well and was operating as a product owner and a Scrum Master, was actually trying not to be a Scrum Master, but ended up being where it just ended up was the perfect job for me. Within that role, people were saying, oh, we want you to be our Scrum Master. Outside of work, people were calling me, asking me what it takes to be a Scrum Master. Or when I saw people doing the Scrum Master role wrong, I'd be like, hey, you need to do this way. Then finally I go, okay, I think I'm a Scrum Master. So I pursued a fully dedicated Scrum Master role. And I have been a fully dedicated Scrum Master since 2019, different companies, different industries. Jeffrey mentioned layoffs. I have been a part of 3 layoffs in my Agile journey, most recently in February. So I am part of the recent crowd. I now am in a new contract role, but I will tell you, people say, have something before you need it. Well, I had my personal business on the side while I was working professionally under the Scrum Mother LLC. It started as a blog and a social media handle, and I actually incorporated it. So I've been doing coaching and mentoring and workshops on the side as it was. And now the current gig I have is a full-time contract role through my LLC. So it's a combination of both worlds, to where I have a full-time role. At the same time, I am living my best entrepreneur journey, at least dipping my toes in it. Okay. But with that being said, part of this journey is I do content creation. I do not consider myself a content creator, but I do content creation. I am a Scrum Master Agilist by trade. So this is one thing where I am going to ask if you could turn on your camera for just a moment, but you don't have to. This is only for people that want to, because I have a very small clip. If those of you who are on social media, there is a trend going on right now about baby mama still got it. Okay, anybody seen that? Okay, where the clip says basically where you have women who are not dressed up and they're saying, oh, so you think because baby mama's been handling the house and handling them these kids that she ain't still pressure? And then they have a transition. So I did a video earlier before I got all dolled up. And then this is going to be just a short clip afterwards. Okay. So I'm going to just film that for anybody who wants to come on, and you'll see me doing right here, and then I'll post it. I always post it on my social media. Okay. So are y'all ready? All right. 1, 2, 3. And you may not even hear the music in the background. Oh, yeah. Hold on just a second. Oh, yeah. No, the baby mama still got it. Okay. Let me see. Let me see. Oh, yeah. Hey, I just thought I'd let you know the baby mama still got it. Okay. So that's what it is. Could y'all see that? Could you hear it in the background? I don't know if you could hear it. So that's what it is.
That's cute. That's cute. That's cute.
Yeah. Some a little fun. All right. So a little mix, a little work hard, play hard. That's what we're here for today. Okay. So now what we're actually here for, we're going to go through. Regarding conflict, there are 2 things I want to say about this presentation. The first one is that the following information is my experience only. It is not necessarily representative of the industry, nor is it representative of the companies I've worked for, and other people, Agilists on this call, may have a different perspective. Okay, so that's always my disclaimer. The other thing I need to ask, because this came up in my last presentation, If you could come off mute real quick or post in the chat, what is your experience with conflict management? Is there anyone here who's ever taken any training on it? Anyone? No? Okay, because I gave this presentation actually to the Agile for Patriots group, which you may see on LinkedIn. It's for military veterans and spouses who are trying to get experience and as an Agilist. And so I gave this presentation to them, and there was somebody who had actually had experience with conflict. So that was their feedback. And I said, that's a good question. Let's see, Amanda said, we did crucial conversations as a book study. Amanda, that is a great point of view. And actually, at the end of this presentation, I have a series of resources, books, trainings, other things that you might want to look into. And Crucial Conversations is one of those books. Okay, so with that being said, now that I have a little bit of understanding as to where we're coming in, because I don't want to patronize anyone, talk to you about how I actually got here. And it's very, very near and dear to my heart to the Agile International Conference. Some of you may have seen me do a presentation on how to get experience as a Scrum Master without being a Scrum Master. I did that from 2020 to 2024, really over a series of years, about 10 presentations. And my foundation is that there is training that is formal training. So I would consider what we're doing right now formal training versus the informal training, which I would consider like the street smarts. My Scrum Master philosophy is to where I believe the two things that make for a great Scrum Master are operations and compassion. And together we help build a healthy system and value. And we are the get stuff done people. All right. So when I talk about informal training, the street smarts that necessarily you won't learn in a CSM class or the Scrum Guide, that is how I broke it down. I broke it down to 6 tips that you could do from an operations perspective to get experience as a Scrum Master, as well as 6 tips from a compassion perspective that you can learn to get experience as a Scrum Master. Okay. One of those of the compassion was related to conflict management. Okay. But in that conversation is when it actually got really deep and people wanted to learn more. And shout out to Regina, because after I gave this presentation last year, I reached out and I just said, hey, how did it go? She's like, I think I really like to see you go deeper into conflict management. And with that being said, I actually have a master's in conflict management from Kennesaw State University. And the reason why it's also called conflict management rather than conflict resolution is because not all conflicts can be resolved. And we're going to talk about that. Does anybody know who this is in the top right-hand corner? And you can post in the chat or you can come up. Yes, Britney Spears. And this was from Give Me More. So people were saying, give me more. So I am responding to your answers and I am answering your prayers. So that is how we come to today, where this conversation derived from that and going deeper all about conflict. Okay. So before we dive any deeper though, the first thing we have to talk about is, what does conflict mean to you? When you hear that word conflict, what are things that come to mind? And you can post in the chat or you can come off mute. What are words or phrases or feelings you get when you hear the word conflict? Different perspectives, blocker, okay. Anyone else? Disagreements? Okay. Liliana, would you be willing to come off mute and tell me more of what you were thinking when you said different perspectives? Okay, different opinions, fight, conflicts are my love language. Okay.
I think about when on a team there's different perspectives and there's hard conversations and it's hard to move forward from those conversations. That's where the conflict comes. So that's why I said.
Okay. All right. Is there anyone, when you think conflict, it brings the warm and fuzzy? And this is a serious question. Is there anyone that on this call that when you hear conflict, you think, oh, that's fun? And I'm sorry, Brianna, I think is what it said, that conflicts are my love language.
Yes, that is correct. And I would fall into that category that being
Okay.
that I spend so much time in the conflict space that you kind of just get comfortable with it. And, it's a warm, fuzzy blanket after a while.
Okay. Suzanne said the same thing. Suruchi?
Yes, Katrina, I feel like specifically being a Scrum Master, if team members are getting open, they are being fearless, and that is appearing as a conflict, that is productive thing that is happening, because letting them open, letting them fearlessly express what they want to is a good sign. It's a sign of healthy team. That is how I think. But
Okay.
if they are quiet, that's a sign of problem.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And Suzanne says conflicts uncover better understanding amongst the team. All right. Y'all are setting things up. All right. So what we're going to talk about, that is the first thing that we need to address before anything else, is what does conflict mean to me? For two reasons. My approach is always know thyself. Start with yourself before you start coaching anyone else. Okay. And oftentimes the way we handle conflict as an adult is how conflict was handled when we were children. So if conflict naturally to you sounds like a good thing and we can work through this, and maybe growing up, maybe you didn't even have that, but maybe some people did. Some people grew up in an atmosphere where there's family meetings and your point of view matters and was not the perspective of children are to be seen and not heard. There are other people who grew up in an environment to where there's slamming doors and there's yelling and fighting and arguing, or somewhere in the middle to where there's silence. And that is also not necessarily a positive experience. And we have to know when we are talking about conflict management, what is our innate go-to when it comes to conflict? Because that can either make conflict resolved better, or it could make it worse. So one of the most important things during my master's degree was the Thomas-Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument. This is an assessment that you can take online, and I think it's $50. I tried to get group discounts, and it just wasn't worthwhile. But this QR code will go to that if you are using a computer right now, and you can scan it with your phone. But the highlight is that this assessment puts our conflict style into 5 different categories. On the assessment of assertiveness, which is having or showing a confident and forceful personality, versus on the level or compared to our level of cooperativeness, involving mutual assistance in working towards a common goal. Okay. Now, I will say on one of the questions I got before this, actually at Agile International Conference, is someone said, well, what if we handle things different in different situations? And that's completely reasonable. And in fact, it's probably very common, but we have to know we have to start there. We have to know what that looks like and know what our go-to is in any given moment. So looking at this, the options are, if you have high assertiveness and lower cooperativeness, that's competing. High assertiveness and cooperativeness is collaborating. Somewhere in the middle, a little bit of both, compromising. Low assertiveness and low cooperativeness is avoiding. And low assertiveness but high cooperativeness is accommodating. Looking at this, is there anyone who come off mute to say what you feel like you are? Or where you fall on this?
I'm high in the assertiveness.
Okay. So either way, you're going to fall somewhere, like your go-to is high assertiveness. So you're going to be somewhere between competing and collaborating at all times.
Yes, so I'm very high in collaboration. I have been known to be competitive as well.
Okay. All right.
But I also yeah, I also strive to be a really good listener, and especially like I really try to listen to all sides and try to have empathy. That's one thing
Okay.
I'm always striving to do.
Okay, awesome. So when I gave this presentation before, I'm like, I'm always assertive, meaning I'm going to always fall between competing and collaborating. I'm not naturally a competing person, though. When I'm at my best, I fall in collaborating. However, I even told them, I was like, I never avoid things. The funny thing is, I left that presentation and I was left that presentation to go be with somebody I know to have a conversation, and it got difficult, and I definitely avoided the conversation. I like stopped it. And so it makes me think there are times at my best when I'm in a place where I feel safe and happy and I feel my input will matter, I'm always collaborating. But when I'm in a place where I feel unsafe, when I feel there are other people that may be unsafe, meaning that engaging would make things more difficult, or when I'm just not my best self, and I'm hangry, does not make for a productive conflict manager. Okay. So these are things that before we engage anyone else, we want to know what our stance is. And to that note, we also want to make sure that we have the proper support. Okay, so one thing I want to clarify is that no matter where you fall on this, no matter what style or you have, it doesn't mean that any of them are bad. Okay, that was one thing I want to make very clear, because there are sometimes somebody at my last presentation said, well, I'm going to match their energy. Sometimes that might help. Sometimes that might not. When I walk into a new team, one of the first things I do is I schedule a presentation where I just tell people about myself, ways of working. And one of the things I was like, you want to see the bad person come out? You want to see the bad version of Katrina come out? Have someone talk down to me. Or if I feel like somebody's being belittled, it's not going to be pretty. And it doesn't mean that that's bad or good, but that may not always help the situation. Think of Martin Luther King. That was his perspective of nonviolence, that he relied on that because matching other people's energy probably would not actually help. Okay. But I also believe that hurt people. And once you know more about yourself and you know where your stance, it's important to be able to have people around you that you can rely on for support, that might also hold you in check sometimes. I believe that every coach needs a coach and every mentor needs a mentor. And when we are in our roles where we are leaders, I am very weary of people who give advice that won't seek advice. So whether that is a psychologist, whether that is a religious affiliate, a pastor, a priest, or mentor, like the woman, the second woman on the left is Jamie Bennett. That is actually my coach. Or Monica is on the right, and that is my accountability partner who I meet with once a week just to work out some co-working stuff. And I provide all of these options because not everybody will go seek a formal mental health provider, but having some support specifically as a leader is what I value, especially in this presentation where we're going to be talking about some touchy subjects. Okay. So I will tell you, this next section was originally not part of what I thought would be valuable, but I felt like it would be neglectful to talk about types of conflict and to talk about ways to manage conflict without talking about what actually can cause conflict. Okay. So what is conflict? We already talked about it. It elicits a variety of things from people, right? But really all conflict is a difference in thoughts, personality, action, anything that's just different or opposed. Okay. I have, what is this image, this black and white image on the right?
A fingerprint.
Yeah. What? What's Susan?
A fingerprint.
Thumbprint, fingerprint. Why do you think I include that? What do we know about fingerprints?
Unique.
They're never the same.
They're never the same. Innately. That means if you are afraid of conflict, you are always going to be scared. It's literally inevitable because we have natural differences that we're just born with. And it doesn't mean anybody's doing anything wrong. It doesn't mean that it's always related to people even, right? People will always be involved when there's conflict, but that doesn't mean it's always a people problem, which we'll get to. But that's what, if you don't learn anything else from this conversation, that's one of the primary takeaways, is that conflict is just, it's just different. It just means blocker. and somebody online had told me conflict is not a blocker, it's a good thing. I'm like, conflict just means different. So it can be a blocker, and not all blockers are bad. Sometimes it's intentional, okay? So there is actually, if you're into reading and you're interested, there is actually a whole handbook on the handbook of conflict resolution, okay? Now I'm gonna do y'all a solid, and I put just the basic things up here, okay? The original view of conflict was that it was just between two people, always, okay? Is that ever true? Raquel, you're shaking your head. Why is that? Why is it not true?
Well, from the perspective of being a Scrum Master, you have a team, and it's sometimes a team conflict with more than one person.
Yeah. So that is actually the perspective of this. Is called, we always hear something saying that there's always two sides. But from a conflict resolution perspective, there's actually the third side. So where there is always people that are directly related or they're interested observers. So I tell people, and I tell my teams this: what happens at home impacts our work. What happens at work impacts our home. And so, and all those things are exponential. We bring joy, the joy will be multiplied. We are upset, it potentially will be multiplied. So what this then introduces is the perspective of that there's always things around us, people, processes, and technology that impact what we're doing. So one of the other most vital things from my career as a Scrum Master, coaching other Scrum Masters, being on a hierarchy committee of Scrum Masters, as well as being a conflict management professional, was the idea of worldviews. Is there anyone here who has heard of the term or idea of worldviews? Okay. All right, so worldview, Jeffrey, it looks like, were you going to say something?
Nope.
Okay, so worldview is just that at any given time, we were born and raised in a family of this and that, and the house we grew up in, maybe some of us didn't have a house growing up in, maybe at all. Where we lived, the people that surrounded us shaped our worldview. And that was vital to me. And it's synonymous with whatever window we are looking in or out at any given time. If we're looking out a window, what's happening inside our home? We're looking outside of a window, what's happening outside the home? What if we're standing outside the window? What's happening with us versus what's happening with people inside? I often think of, if you're driving in your car, maybe, or even people observing, and there's someone like myself who speaks with my hands, right? You might think that they're yelling at each other, right? But from our perspective, they might look aggressive or look angry. What if we just know they're angry, but it's not about the person that they're in a conversation with? They're just really excited, right? So our worldview shapes everything we do. And if you leave with nothing else, that's the primary takeaway. One of the primary takeaways I want you to know is that just because somebody does something different than us, and I'm not even talking about, our race or gender. I'm talking about literally, we have different information systems. We have different thought processes. It doesn't mean that they're stupid. It doesn't mean that they're wrong. It just means that we have a conversation about it. Okay. So then that goes to trust and bias. Anybody know what this picture in the top left-hand corner is?
Trustful.
Yes, a trust fall. Fun fact, I was a ropes course instructor in high school and college. I tried to find a picture of myself. I couldn't. But that is one of the primary things where you start and you have someone fall and you're hoping and trusting that the people are going to catch you, that they're paying attention. Sometimes they did it from a platform that was about 10 feet off the ground. And that requires to where there's a certain environment for success, right? So when it comes to conflict management, there has to be some level of trust, but for not necessarily to get in the conversation, but in order for it to be resolved or get to a turning point or a breakthrough, there has to be a level of concern where everybody is going to come, be open and honest, or at least everybody's going to trust that the situation is not going to be made worse. Okay, so then you see the pictures of the in the middle are my cats that are happily curled up in my arms, and they trust me with their whole life that they are safe and they are comfortable and that they know that they're home. Okay, now how many of you like bananas? Okay, we got a few. I innately do not trust your judgment, okay, because I hate bananas. And my dad and I have this conversation all the time. My dad loves bananas. His favorite things have banana splits. I genuinely I gag at the smell. I can smell bananas from a mile away. I told you food is my favorite food, except for bananas. All right. So what if it's not bananas? What if it's something else? And all of a sudden that my bias towards favoring bananas or unfavoring bananas then leads me to not trust you and to trust what you're doing and what you're not going to do. Okay. So then we have to talk about boundaries and stalemates. All right. Who has a smoke-free home or a shoe-free home? Anyone? I have, okay, Lazat is giving a thumbs up. So when we're talking about boundaries, these are the limits and rules we place for ourselves. This is also important. All Asian houses. Yes. This is really important because a lot of people, boundaries has become some of a buzzword, and where people are talking about, oh, well, they have zero boundaries. Boundaries is for the person who is creating this. You're saying, like you say, I have a smoke-free home. I have a smoke-free home. You cannot smoke in my house. You can't smoke anywhere around it. Sometimes I prefer no shoes, but it's not a deal breaker. And I understand that there are some people that will not come to my home because they cannot smoke. And that is their choice. That's the repercussion or the consequence of my boundary, but that's a choice, right? Same thing. I just saw something on social media where someone says, if I have to take off my shoes and you don't have slippers, I am not coming to your home. Okay. And that's okay. Setting appropriate boundaries is also related to conflict management, and to be able to make sure that we can discuss our boundaries. But sometimes we don't know our boundaries been crossed until it has been crossed. Okay, which is important to know, which goes back to knowing thyself. All right, so then have you ever heard of an irrevocable commitment? Okay, let's take it a little bit. This is what I would call a very, very, very strong boundary. This is probably the strongest boundary you can set. I have the example of a job offer. There are people who will say they have a job offer in their hand and they go to their current employer and say, I'm going to leave if you don't give me what they're offering. I would consider that an irrevocable commitment. You are making a commitment that you really can't back away from. Okay. Or you might say in a relationship, if you have one more drink or you do this thing, then I'm going to leave. Those are commitments that you have to, that are often, if you choose to back away from them, you have to be able to, how do I want to say this? Because this is more of a sensitive subject. You have to be able to follow through. When you state something like that, you have to know that you mean it. It can't be used as a weapon. It cannot be used as a threat, which is again why boundaries matter, because it's for you and what you need for your life, not for other people. But then there's also the point of a stalemate. Why do you think I have a brick wall? Anybody? Okay. Stalemate is when you get to a point to where it cannot be resolved. Okay. A situation where no progress can be made or no one can gain an advantage. This is a point where I'll start to talk about how it doesn't mean that it's bad. Those of you that are coming from Atlassian, we know about backlog management. How many times have we had something on our to-do list that we're not going to do? We either say it's not important right now, so we're putting it on hold, or this is something we're never going to do. That's a form of a stalemate. And it doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means we get to a point where we've said, this is not going to work. It happens from all aspects, sometimes in technology, saying, hey, we need to upgrade to the new phone, but what I have is working. So do I really need to? Or from a process where we say, there's this thing that I really want to do. Like, I don't know, tell me somebody, I'll ask you this. What is something that has been on your to-do list and you actively said, I'm not going to do that? Or a request that you got and you're like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. No thinking. Okay. That's okay. Think about it. Allie, sorry, you're probably talking about boundaries or the irrevocable commitments, deal breakers. That is the perfect term. What are your deal breakers? Or when we're talking about our backlog and what our teams have, what are our must-haves? Which in Agile terms, what is another word for a three-word acronym for must-haves? Starts with an M. Anyone?
Most valuable product.
What'd you say?
Most valuable product.
Okay, that's close. That's close. That's
Okay.
how oftentimes, well, that's often how people use it. And I'm not necessarily saying that's wrong, but it's actually minimum viable product.
Yeah.
What is the thing we have to have? And I will say this, whether it is a process, you mean like when we're working on our products and we're saying it has to have this or it cannot work. Technology, the same thing. I have to do this thing or I'm gonna fail. Relationships, I have to have these standards. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Okay. That's where we then get into stalemates, right? So we have standards, we have our must-haves, our deal breakers, and then it's not, again, this is where the worldview comes in. It doesn't mean that anything's bad and what your must-have is maybe different than mine, and that's okay. We just got to talk about it because what if our deal breakers are the deal breaker? Something to consider. Let me tell you about another thing with stalemate, an example. I have someone close to me in a relationship, okay, someone close to me, and that person is in a relationship with someone who I do not always get along with, okay? And there have been times where I said, this is not going well. I like to talk things out. And so I said, can I call them or can they call me? The person in the middle said, no, don't do that. And I said, okay, things are not going to be resolved until we have this conversation. And that person said, that's fine. They did not want to have it. So at that point, what do you do? To me, that's a stalemate because in saying, hey, things may not get worse, but this is actually not going to be resolved. But sometimes that happens. Okay. So then we have to talk about intent versus impact. First of all, am I going too fast? How's this pace? Doing a check-in. This working for you, Raquel? You're on camera. This is good? Okay. Because this is not really the meat of the presentation, but I just want to make sure. Intent versus impact. There is a book that's also in my resources called Turn the Ship Around by David Marquet. David Marquet was a Navy captain, and he wrote a book about the leader model, saying you always come with, I intend to do this, and the person in charge then can create a point of view saying yes or no. All right. So often that's often how I talk in my coaching and at work. I'll say I intend to do this. But what if our intent does not have the impact that we want it to have? Right? So the intent is our intention, our purpose, the goal, whereas what actually happens may be completely different. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. I'm going to give you 3 examples. Some funny, some not so funny. The example that I will tell you hits the nail on the head every single time, and it brings me joy, is when I first start, I told y'all, I start a new team, I have what I call the Scrum Master kickoff. Some people will call it like an AMA or a lean coffee with the Scrum Master. And the whole point is so that I can introduce myself to everyone I'm going to be working with. So then when I go to have one-on-ones, I already start with a morale building perspective where they know a little bit about me. But then also we don't have to spend the one-on-ones talking about me and introducing myself. And part of that introduction is also, hey, these are things about myself. This is my communication style. These are things that you might want to know working with me. And then I allow people to ask questions. And something that people love. They said, great. Sometimes people have questions. Sometimes they go, nope, I know who you are. I know what to expect. Awesome. Sometimes they want to dive in and say, hey, we went to the same university. Hey, I have a cat too. Or I'm a car guy. Sometimes I have a picture of my dad with his cars and they'll say, oh, cool. What kind of car is it? And just creates building. So that's where A-OK target right on the money. 2 times. Which one do you want first? 2 times where the impact is not what my intent. One is funny, one's not so funny. So which one do you want first? Funny one or the sad one? Serious. We'll call it serious. Let's see, Jeff. I see you. Jeffrey, which one?
Funny.
Okay. Okay, funny first. True story. All of my stories are true, by the way, which tells me I'm at a level of my profession where I have a lot of stories. So I do social media, right? And I talk, one of my things, I don't do a lot of glitz and glamour, but I edit my captions specifically because I have a lot of people around me who either need the audio to be correct or they need the captions to be correct. And so I do it, I think, by just turning on the captions and not editing it, I think is a waste of time. So one day I was having I was doing a video on Kanban, okay, talking about to do, doing, done. Well, when I went to edit the captions, it translated Kanban to condom. And if you didn't know, you would be talking a condom board of to do, doing, done. Okay, caught that one. So just telling you, edit your captions, all right? Now, the not so funny one. Some of you may have already heard this story, but because I've told it a few times at other presentations. When I was in college, I think it was my master's degree actually, I nannied for 4 girls that their parents had recently gone through a divorce and then their mom passed away suddenly. Okay, or a very short time. It wasn't like waking up, and I thought I was being helpful to clean the house, including all the linens. And I thought I was really trying to help. Well, come to find out, the oldest daughter, that the pillow was the last thing she had with her mom's scent on it. Okay, did not have the impact of the intent that I wanted. All right, so one of the things that we can do to remediate this is, one, state our intent. Maybe we should talk about things before we do it. Surprises are not always helpful, but that also, it makes us very aware of, I told you about when we talk about our conflict style. I told you sometimes I do end up avoiding things. And ever since that conversation happened, I've been very attentive to, when do I tend to avoid? And one is when I don't think I'm going to get the impact that I intend. Like if the conversation I feel like is not going to be productive, if, doing whatever action I'm thinking about partaking in, whether it's a process or a piece of technology, if it's not going to be productive, I likely will not try to engage. Or if I've assessed the situation and potentially engaging would create harm. Okay, I'll give you an example. This just happened. I'm at the bank, and do you know how sometimes it's tailored the ATM is inside the lane, right? So you got to go through the bank lane and it's up against on the building. And so I could go through the lane, but there was a car that was stopped at the edge, like by the sidewalk. There was a gentleman in it, but he didn't look harmed and he didn't look like he was in distress, and he was playing on his phone from what I could tell. And I was like, I don't know, is he waiting on somebody to come out? That was a situation to where I did not engage because I didn't know, it didn't look like the person was in harm. And I also didn't know, maybe there's something going on and it could harm me to get involved. So that's an example where I consciously said, I need to make a note of this. This is an example of when, because before, many years ago, I would talk to anyone. Are you okay? Can I help? And I've created better boundaries for myself to assess the situation before getting involved. Sometimes I miss the old version of myself for this reason, but I'm just saying, sometimes it's to be aware. So then when we talk about, okay, so we've talked about trust and bias and boundaries and stalemate, and we've talked about intent versus impact. When I talked about this on social media, there was somebody who specifically said that his point of view was, if we just assume good intent, nobody has to apologize. right? Because if you assume they had good intent, then there was no harm done, right? And I honestly would tell you, it made me think. It racked my brain what my perspective around that is. And my perspective then came, and I chatted with him offline, is that just because we had good intent, and maybe the other person knew we had good intent, doesn't mean that no harm was done and that we don't need to apologize. All right. So this is also where we talk about the value of an apology versus a genuine apology. So I told you before, this cup says, I'm sorry for what I said when I was hangry or hungry. That would be maybe not the most pleasant way to say an apology. But who is this in this yellow shirt, this fine gentleman in this yellow shirt? Anybody?
The dirty jobs guy.
Yes.
Yeah, dirty jobs guy.
Dirty.
Yep.
Yes, Mike Rowe, dirty jobs, because expressing a genuine apology and ramifications is a dirty job. And that's really the difference. When you just say, I'm sorry. It's why I'm actually a firm believer in being very attentive to anybody not apologizing if they don't actually mean it. It gets tricky with kids because sometimes you got to teach people, but I don't want anybody to say I'm sorry without meaning, right? So that's where oftentimes in my own relationships, I will say I apologize rather than I'm sorry, right? But it takes an acknowledgement of what took place. You take responsibility, and you are also trying to do better. Now, this is also where the concept of forgiveness versus reconciliation comes in. You can give forgiveness, and you can actually even offer a genuine apology. That does not mean you have to reconcile. That does not mean you have to regain a relationship with that person or group. But you cannot maintain a positive relationship and get closure without forgiveness. It doesn't mean you actually have to tell the person you forgive them to their face. But I will tell you, in order for things to happen going forward, you have to have a genuine apology and genuine forgiveness. Okay? All right, so this is a trivia question. All right, so we talked about conflict and worldviews and trust and bias, boundaries and stalemates, intent and impact, and the power of a genuine apology. What do all those things have in common? Or what can they produce? And again, come off mute or post in the chat.
What was the question again?
A question: when you put all these things that we've just talked about together, what do they all have in common? Or what do you think could be positive outcomes? Conflict resolution. Yes, Allie. Okay. Somebody said, let me scroll up this here because it's one of the first things. Different perspectives is one that you talked about. Okay, conflict management and resolution, conflict management. All right, so it wasn't really a trick question, but it's more of that we can start having opportunity, choices, and new life. That's why I say what we do in this world is all about why it's our best friend. Like I say, this is why this is called the Scrum Masters Bestie. Originally, this presentation was called conflict, just another word for blocker. But this is genuinely, it's our thing. We are master conflict managers, whether you're a Scrum Master, an Agile coach, or even Suzanne in product. You are a master conflict manager of product. When we start having conversations, I've worked at a company where when I start asking people how things are going, that our product was the problem. And that's not pleasant, right? So when we start admitting our problem's a problem and we don't even like to build it and don't like to use it, maybe we want to talk about that, right? Or when we start talking about our relationships, or where I have Scrum, how many times have people said there are too many meetings? And sometimes I agree with them because we have people holding them hostage, and people dealing, when I say, which is the most beneficial, or which is the least valuable for you? They have answers that they were holding on to, and it's not intentional. It's because nobody had asked them. So people were just living through their hell, literally, because the conversations weren't taking place. And that doesn't mean it doesn't mean that anybody was doing anything wrong. It just happened to be. So when we start having these conversations, a whole new world opens up. All right. So at this point, I'm going to do a highlight reel, but you've kind of already heard me say it. There are three I have identified. I break everything up into people, processes, and technology. So at this point, putting everything that we just talked about, what are the type of blockers or conflicts that we might be dealing with? And this is a framework I would like you to use, because it's getting away from conflict is a bad word. Conflict is people. Oh my gosh, somebody hates me, or I hate them, right? People are the primary conflict that we think about, okay? But what I want to reshape reframe your thoughts here is that even when it's a people problem, it doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean that there's a problem child. It just means that for whatever reason, maybe it's skills and competency related. Somebody was hired for a job that the job changed. Sometimes it happens. They get hired for one job and get asked to start doing something else. And then when the other thing that they're asked to do isn't their skill set, it starts looking like a personnel or performance issue when it's really not. Okay, I'll give you another example. There is somebody that in a previous team that before I met them, everybody said, oh, you got to watch out for that person. That person just walks out the room. They'll just raise their hand and say, why are we doing this? Okay. But when I met them, I just saw that they have social interactions that maybe needed a little tweaking, and they just learned different. But once this person had the correct expectations, I sat with them one-on-one and talked them through it. They were fine. This was an example of someone that was likely on the autism spectrum, but nothing had ever been diagnosed. And without me recognizing it, that person was going to be terminated, because it was starting to look like it was a performance issue. Okay, so that's an example of where Scrum Masters specifically, but anybody, we kind of got to see, I always get this back, like see the forest through the trees. Is that it? Or see the trees through the forest? One of those. Like we got to be able to be aware of what's surrounding us and knowing that what we see in front of us may not necessarily be true. Or what if you have someone that is, and I've seen this, the person who's willing to speak out and be open and ask questions, and it is a deferential environment. That person's seen as the naysayer. That person is seen as the problem child. And we have to be willing to be able to recognize what's true and what's not. Or the opposite, when you have the boss's child or a family member that everybody is raving about, but this person is actually the one that's not doing any work, right? We have to be aware of those. I'm going to come back to these in the interest of time, because answering some of these questions will help as a form of conflict management, but I want to get through them. So the second form of blocker processes. These are blockers related to our ways of working. These are just like the when, the where, the how. All right. An example of a process. Sometimes I've had where I've asked these questions before to try to dig into how things are going. And sometimes it's Scrum. Scrum is their pain point. Scrum is their blocker, often because it's not being, as I mentioned, maybe not being lived out. There's somebody who's been in the role that was not very successful, or they were just checking the boxes, just facilitating the meetings and not even doing that well. All right. Another process that people have said when I've talked about this is, or maybe intake processes. Suzanne, this is probably one of your favorite topics. How do we know how to request come to us? Okay. If that's not identified, it causes a problem for everybody. Everybody's like, oh, I don't know how, like we keep getting requests from this person and this person and this person, and our backlog is all over the place. We don't even have a centralized backlog. That again, doesn't mean anybody's doing anything wrong, but that is a form of a blocker that we experience. Anybody disagree with this? Anyone have any challenges? Okay. So then my favorite, technology blockers. And the reason why this is my favorite is because they're often the easiest to identify, and also it's not a people problem. Sometimes it is the easiest to resolve. Sometimes it can take a little bit longer, but they're usually very clear, right? Would you agree, Jeffrey? You're shaking your head.
Yes.
Yeah. So I love when somebody says the tool's not working. Cool. Let me go, because I know for a fact that's not a people problem. let me give you some examples. I'll start with an easy one. When some team members were supposed to take a training, they were actually, I think they were trying to learn React. I think that's what it was. They were regular developers, UI developers trying to learn React, whatever. That's an example. And there were 6 to 12 that all needed to take this training, and everyone was blocked out of it. Okay. So instead of all of them having to go find out who they needed to talk to and then resolve it, go talk to them, I was able to do that for them. But without me, they would have had to all do those individually. They would have to take time from coding and developing, but that was an example of a technology issue. Another one that was more difficult. Go ahead, Suzanne.
I just want to tell you a really funny story, just really
Okay.
quick. So when I worked at Wells Fargo, so we would get these computer updates pushed out to us, and because I worked at a bank and I was actually in cybersecurity, so you would have to take these updates, and so me, you know, being in like I always took them like immediately. I knew, and often they took like 2 hours or something. So I had a really important presenter come to, and he was presenting across like, I think 250 people, and he was like a guest speaker and for this training group that I administered. And 15 minutes before his presentation, his computer started like mandatorily updating, and he couldn't, well, basically he presented through my computer. Yeah.
Well, I will tell you, when Allie was talking at the beginning of this, I don't know what happens. The screen froze for just a few seconds, and I had a minor panic attack, thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be that presenter that is not ready and unable to present. So that's an example where, yes, those things, it may not have done anything wrong, and it could look like a people issue or a people person, but really it's not. So oftentimes, a lot of times when I ask these questions, people think things, they are often pointing to an issue related to a person, but when we categorize them, I'm like, it's not really a person, that's not really their fault, right? So I'll give you an example. Another example, kind of similar to Suzanne's. So you know, the traditional backlog is to do, doing, done, right? But sometimes you can have more in progress categories in doing. So one of them is code review. Okay, that's when the developer has started coding and they're waiting for somebody to review it. Okay, well, I'm not a technical person, but I have eyes that I could see. I'm like, hey, it just seems like things are staying in this column for multiple days. And I'm like, what is that normal? Right? It seems like this is not normal. And I deferred to my developers. Well, what come to find out is when they were doing their code reviews, the system it was taking like to push a pull request for them to merge, it was causing them 45 minutes to an hour. Okay, that's what their response was. They're like, it's 45 minutes to an hour. And I'm saying, is that normal? Because that doesn't sound normal. And they all said, no, that's not normal. Well, come to find out, it was actually a server issue. The server for the company needed to be upgraded. So again, if you're just looking at this in our role, face value, and you're like, why is it taking them so long to do these things? And if somebody wasn't aware and they were just checking in on our board, they might be like, what's wrong with so-and-so? Or why is your team not moving very fast? So you have to ask more questions. This job is all about questions, which I am an expert at. So that's an example to where it could look like it is a people problem, but it's not. And to some extent, it's both technology and process, right? But it's like the things in our life where we can ask at any given point. I ask my teams, like, is actually the stuff working for you, right? So technology is all about the hardware, the software, the equipment in your life that's working versus not working, and what I can do to help resolve that. And I'm coming from their perspective. This whole presentation has really been from my perspective in general of life as a Scrum Master, but this is why it can really be applicable to anyone. Anytime in your life, you can say, hey, is there something that's not working for you, and how can I help? All right. So with that being said, there's a few ways that I recommend that you could walk out today and get a little bit of practice. So I'm going to tell you that. All right. So the first is to know yourself and to do everything you can to learn your own assessments. Part of that is also setting clear expectations. Say, I intend to do this. Talk about it before you do it. Or when someone says, how are you? Don't say, I'm fine, or whatever, which I will say is, you know, the stereotypical version of when women say, I don't care what we have for dinner. Okay, then say what you don't want for dinner. Okay, but be more attentive. So an example of setting clear expectations is working agreements. That's what we do within our teams. You can do this within relationships as well. I just recently learned more people are doing prenups because it's also a working agreement, whether you agree with it or not. They're saying, hey, these are the expectations I have for this marriage. Just saying, I've never done it, but something to consider. Backlog. I can't say this enough. First of all, backlog is the backbone to Scrum, but also having a clear centralized backlog is a conflict management resolution tactic, okay? Because it puts all the asks in one place and allows you to prioritize them. And I will tell you every time, I cannot back you up if that's not happening. I cannot back you up as a team member. I cannot back you up as a fellow employee. So what I do, even personally, I have a backlog for my personal workflow. So everything I do as a Scrum Master, not ceremonies, but the larger asks I do, I actually have a Trello board and I can review it with my manager at any given time. And then also I have a very clear performance review whenever I need to do one, because I can say, hey, these are the things that I'm doing to bring value, right? These are the things that didn't work out. These are the things I've been asked to do that were not a priority, and actually have that conversation. So have a backlog, please. I just had a Scrum Master I'm working with that her boss specifically asked her that, said, hey, you've been here for X time. How have you brought value to this company? And she didn't have a backlog. She's like, that's one of the action items I need to do. This person has had to-do list, but it just hasn't been centralized. So it's a way that when you track what you're doing, asking, how can I help you? Asking, how are things going? Having a retrospective. I tell you, one of the questions I ask anyone and everyone, do you have the resources you need to be successful? If you say no, what is that? Then I, as a Scrum Master, can go help resolve it. That is my coaching plan. That is my marching orders. If something is getting in your way, but you can ask anyone and everyone this. What is a pain point you're having? What is the process you're going through that annoys you every time you do it? How can I help resolve that? Learn about things and people that you don't agree with. This was where it got the hot topic last time I was doing this presentation. How we got here is, you know, specifically in a very polar, politicized world in the United States. The reality is, if you really want to get comfortable with conflict management, you can watch other news outlets that don't align with your political beliefs. Listen to different radio stations. Attend a rally that does not align with your political party, if you have a political party at all. I'm just saying, it's options, right? Or right now, there's a lot of town halls. You can go to town hall for a representative that does not align to your district even, or that does not align to your party. You could join a problem-solving body of people. Who is this? This gentleman, the second with the hat. Anybody know what that is?
You're showing your age. That's Vanilla Ice.
That's
Yes!
Vanilla Ice.
Yes, why
Who knows?
would we talk about Vanilla
Who knows?
Ice and problem
Who knows that
solving?
song? Who knows the Vanilla Ice song?
Who knows it? You get bonus points.
Which
So
one?
you got a problem, yo, I'll solve it, right? So if you want to practice, you can get involved with city council, school board, PTA. If you live in an area that has a homeowners association, people like to put down HOAs, but they are problem-solving places. You could join a structured curriculum, such as mine, which is conflict management or resolution program. There's certificates, which are just short-term, bachelor's, master's, doctorates. You can join a bystander program, bystander training, bystander awareness. One of my negotiation professor from my master's program said that he always steps in. So the example I told you where I was at the bank, that's a situation where my professor probably would have asked, like, hey, actually verbalize what's going on. But that's his perspective. He says, hey, he will always step in for an altercation at any time. Or mediation or ombudsman training. That's something you can do also in a weekend. there might be some ongoing clinicals that you have to do. And then finally, be vulnerable to have a difficult conversation that maybe you have a conflict or an issue that's going on. Again, it might be people, processes, or technology, and just to be able to talk about it. It gets comfortable. I just gave some feedback this week about some difficult issues that exist whether we talk about them or not, right? So if we should probably talk about things and bring them to the surface. And I at one of the previous times I talked about this, I always used to say, attack the problem, not the person. And I had somebody actually give feedback saying that feels very aggressive, like that puts me on guard. So they preferred the terminology focus on the problem and not the person. But I also had someone else in the room that said, no, let's go. Like it psychs me up. Go get that problem. So even that's an example, like even terminology can be a deal breaker for us, and meta communication, talking about how we talk about things. All right. So then in terms of resources, someone's already brought them up. There's a series of assessments that you can take to know thyself. The Thomas-Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument, which I talked to you about. If you were a fan of love languages, we said conflict is my love language. It's not one of the love languages, but I totally get you. But that is, even though it comes from five love languages come from a religious context, I do think it's still valuable because it talks about how people are motivated. And in our role, we have to figure out how to approach people at any given time. And then one of the, I actually posted on social media, what is your favorite personality assessment? And these other ones are ones that people voted on and actually gave feedback on. Some of them I'm aware of. I'm a huge Strength Finders fan. I just took Working Genius, which is similar. So like what we do well at. And the Enneagram I love because it focuses on what's your natural state, what's your best state, and how you act when you are not at your best state. Somebody said Ikigai is one that is a favorite. So I have these included. Books, Crucial Conversations, Multicultural Manners. I'll give you an example. In some cultures, our okay sign and our thumbs up sign do not mean the same thing. So being aware at any given time how people collaborate, or for example, it's very common in some cultures to on chat to say, "Hey, Katrina," and will not respond until I respond. Like, so I'm waiting. What do you need from me? State your ask, but they're trying to be respectful and not come off too strong. 5 dysfunctions of a team and turn the ship around. These are some favorites. These are some of my favorites, so I'm passing them on to you. And then if you do want to have your own personal backlog and you don't, I have some resources here for reusable hard physical copies as well as electronic backlog tools. And one of them, for those of you who are with Atlassian, you see Trello and Jira are some of the options. Retrospective resources, if you are new to retrospectives or want to ramp them up, again, to find out where we're at. And thank y'all for having me again. I appreciate you.